It's no secret that the West has trouble understanding the Arab world, and perhaps the Arab world has trouble understanding the West. As Dr. Jamie Reeser said, we don't share the same map, perhaps. We will know at some point. But more problematic are the stereotypes of Arab women, often thought as oppressed, weak, vulnerable, uneducated, and powerless. Today, I hope to share with you a few stories about Arab women and self-empowerment, perhaps in an effort to change stereotypes, provide examples of leadership in the context of the so-called Arab Spring. Initially a bottom-up revolution that was recently co-opted by traditional powers and the criminal acts of ISIS. The title of my presentation is Arab Women, Acts of Courage, Peace Engines at Work. I start with the narration of 3 short vignettes from Yemen, Syria, and Bahrain, or the Kingdom of Bahrain. It highlights some common themes with regard to peace building and conflict resolution, and ends with some recommendations and reflections. My first story comes your way by way of Yemen. It is about my dear friend, Dr. Intilaq al-Mutawakkil, a Yemeni scholar and female leader in her own right. Her story speaks about why we are here today. It's no different from the story of many women. It's a story of hope, high aspirations, the challenges of dealing with conflicts, managing and responding to crises, and demonstrating leadership. I met her in Yemen, to be exact, in February of 2013 at the National Dialogue Conference, where I served as the UN expert on the team of the UN Special Advisor to the Secretary General. She was part of the 2011 Yemeni revolution that ousted former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Listen to this. He reigned for 33 years, and according to the panel of experts on Yemen, he amassed an enormous wealth that ranged between $33 to $66 billion. Would you like me to repeat that? $33 to $66 billion in a country where the average person sustained him or herself on $2 a day. Perhaps the story so far sounds familiar. Corruption, power, adversity, but it is the courage of Dr. al-Mutawakkil and other Yemeni women that made history when the first Arab woman, Tawakkul Karman, was awarded the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize. Yemeni women defied all social norms and traditions to rewrite the future of their country. They won the attention of the world regarding Yemeni women's role in the social change movement and their contributions to Yemeni society. She won my attention with her quiet and respectful engagement with others. Dr. Mutawakkil focuses on women and youth development and telling the story of Yemeni women writers through her publications and writing on gender. Dr. al-Mutawakkil also participated in the drafting of the Yemeni constitution. She was a strong advocate of inclusion of women in the Yemeni political process, and as a peace builder, mediated constantly issues of contention in her community related to gender and gender inequality. Her signature line on her email includes a short quote that speaks to her character. It reads, "Leadership is ethics, an art, a science, and training." Her voice was always one of reason and, more importantly, deep respect for differences, promoting dialogue and a peaceful resolution of issues. Regrettably, like many other women in conflict situations, a few setbacks faced this outstanding world citizen and woman leader. Though the national dialogue ended with close to 1,400 recommendations, slow implementation and disagreement among certain groups on the outcomes deepened divisions. The UN brokered political agreement in Yemen failed due to the parties' inability to reach any consensus on any issue. The country went deeper and deeper into chaos. In November 2014, her father, a prominent Zaydi leader and intellectual, was assassinated. When I asked her about the news of the killing, she wrote back, "Yes, he is my father, and thank you for your condolences and concerns. It is really terrible. Everyone around me has a dead son, father, a brother, or a cousin." On January of 2015, the chief of staff of the president was abducted on his way to deliver the first draft of the Yemeni constitution. further derailing the potential of political reconciliation and dashing the hopes of millions of Yemeni men and women. On March 25, 2015, a Saudi-led coalition started the bombing of Yemen in response to the takeover of a Zaidi group called the Houthis and allies of the former president. I am sad to report to you today, as we are here today, that the bombing still continues today, resulting in a catastrophic human crisis in Yemen. According to the UN Humanitarian Coordinator, more than 85% of Yemenis are in need of humanitarian aid. They are food and water insecure due to a land and sea blockade. Again, due to the blockade, Yemen is also fuel insecure. In light of the continued escalation of event, I exchanged again a few emails with my defiant Dr. Mutawakkil. She wrote, Yemeni women surprised the whole world in 2011 by their effectiveness and big participation in the revolution. They broke the glass ceiling that says it is tradition in society that stops women's participation. Yesterday, a group of young Yemeni women broke the culture and rode the bike for transportation as a result of the oil shortage. This is never, you would never see this in Yemen. But as you see, she is over there riding her bike, and these are Yemeni women covered riding their bicycles from one point to the other because they have no way to get anywhere. Well, we spoke about Yemen. Let me now tell you a little bit about the Kingdom of Bahrain. I was there working on behalf of the UN Development Program. Bahrain was experiencing deep sectarian tensions between Sunnis and Shias, both Islamic groups. The tensions resulted in communal violence that spread across the country and called for economic boycott between communities. What you see in front of you is actually what is called Pearl Square, where all the demonstrations were taking place. My role was to design and deliver workshops on conflict resolution and reconciliation strategies. These workshops were targeted towards high-ranking government officials and all track to, meaning youth, human rights groups, women, you just name it. In a workshop dedicated solely for women organizations providing social services, the women from Bahrain explained how they were the most impacted from the ongoing tensions. They reported to me how the crisis touched their personal as well as their professional lives. They said how children, men, and women were suffering in their communities. They said that past harmonious relationships between communities, i.e. Sunni and Shiite, were falling apart. In a defiant act, Bahraini women refused the sectarian card. They defied all calls for any form of economic and service-related boycott strategy that would deepen the divide. On the contrary, they decided to initiate services between them that promoted relationship building, communal harmony, trauma awareness, and programs to support acts of resilience in their respective communities. In summary, they became the peace engines. My third story from my work is done, or the work completed, is on Syria and the role of women in serving as intermediaries in conflict zones. Zainab, whose name is changed to protect her identity, understood and experienced firsthand the horrors of living in a besieged city, where movement and outside of the city were restricted for months. The toll on the civilian population was grave. Food was scarce, people were starving. Frustrated with the ongoing failure of any negotiations to resolve the growing tensions among the parties, she reported how she and other women started taking very small steps to convince the parties to allow limited food rations to come into the city. They leveraged their personal and family networks to key figures to establish contact with members of the fighting militias. As more successes took place, they eventually were able to serve as intermediaries, and brief local ceasefires took place. Small successes perhaps, but her story demonstrates the power of agency. And finally, my own story. A few weeks ago, I hosted a monthly women's book club, of which I am a member of. We target writings of women from all over the globe. We'd like to understand the diversity of our country. I had recommended Saad Amiri's book, Sharon and My Mother-in-Law. Like me, the author's roots and heritage are from Jordan and Palestine. Amiri's skillful, humorous narrative drew a picture of the brutal and trials of occupation, which she experienced herself during the siege of Ramallah, when Israel enforced long periods of curfew on Palestinians as a punishment for the Second Intifada. She narrates her frustration with then the Prime Minister of Israel, Sharon, for having her live under curfew for weeks with who else but her mother-in-law. I guess difficult relations between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law transcend all kinds of cultures. This time, the discussion was a little bit different. Though we were all Americans, for many of us, our heritage tied us to one of the most protected conflicts, the Arab-Israeli conflict, as you know. We talked about the sensitivity that a discussion of such a book might cause. How do we talk about the occupation without hurting each other's feelings? How do we acknowledge the cruelty and violations of one's rights to movement without demonizing the other party? After all, the power asymmetry between them was very clear. Over a Palestinian cooked meal by my mother, we worked through the discussion. We spoke about the meaning of identity, of belonging, of family ties to our countries of origin, our families' experiences, the role of the media and culture, the ability and the need to listen to understand, to show empathy, the importance of context, which we spoke about this morning, and finally, more important, our commitment to our multicultural book club, which in so many ways represents the sum of our collective American identity. Colleagues, as you may have gathered by now, I have had the opportunity to work in conflict and post-conflict zones in places near and dear to my heart. It was a rich and personal, as well as a professional journey. I had the honor to serve both as an educator, mediator, facilitator, and subject matter expert on the local, national, and international level. As a result of these experiences, I close my presentation with a few key learnings and recommended actions. Recently, I shared with them at an international forum, and I would like to share them with you again. I learned that most people would like to do good. Everyone desires respect and the right to a dignified life. And so I encourage you to do good to yourself and to others. I also learned that culture and context matter, and so please make sure you learn about them. I learned that empowerment does not happen in a vacuum. Believe in yourself and in others. I learned that you need to build on local sources of resilience. Go ahead and identify them. I learned that answers to too many of our dilemmas often reside in us and in our community. We need to look closely. I learned to never assume there is no entry point in a conflict situation. Keep looking. Women's education is key to creating a piece of culture or a culture of peace. Please promote it. I learned that a culture of peace requires reflection and introspection. We need to practice. I learned that you need to plant the seeds of peace so they can grow. Start planting. I learned that occasionally your credibility as a third party may be in question. Remain authentic. As much as there is an economy of war, there is also an economy of peace. We need to help build one. I also learned that a healthy process would support sustainable solutions. We need to design one. I learned that peacemaking and peace building is both an art and a science, and we need to find the artist in us. I close with the following statement. Women are capable of initiating war and peace, but it is when they choose peace that they are at their best. Thank you very much.